up, sports fans? Your favorite sportsbook, BetUS.com, is back for our 28th year of NFL action. With the industry's biggest sign-up bonus of up to 200%, BetUS offers our members the opportunity to cash in on all your favorite sports, including NFL, NBA, MLB, and more. We've also got hundreds of new casino games, including the coolest new European slots, and our live dealers are waiting for you at the table. Sign up at BetUS.com today to get into the action. BetUS, where the game begins.
And now, broadcasting live from Las Vegas, the Snake Sports Talk Show with Jake Silva starts now.
Here we go, ladies and gentlemen, on a Monday. Boy, did we have a lot of action in the NFL. 40 burgers all over the place. A great game, by the way, last night that we got between Washington and the Falcons. I think Jaden Daniels is moving up to such a beautiful spot. My co-host Chase joining us wherever, however you may be watching and listening. Thanks for making us part of your lovely evening as we got this show and tomorrow's show before we kick off 2025. Last two shows of the year. I cannot wait for it. That was fun last night. It was a fun game last night. Little bit of some that was a little bit of some stuff, but in the end, 40 burgers all the way around over the weekend, and tomorrow we've got the second round of college football as well with Penn State and Boise State.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to look forward to in the NFL in the next coming weeks. A lot of seeding for the NFL in terms of the playoffs. The Commanders can have a shot at the 6th seed. If the Packers lose again next week, the Ravens could lose the division if they end up losing and the Steelers win. So that's why the Ravens are not resting their starters. And the biggest seeding of all, the Vikings and Lions getting the fight for the number 1 seed in the NFC. That is a big, big turnout that's going to happen. That's why it's a Sunday night football game.
Well, we're definitely on it tonight. So let's start with that. I think what we are starting to witness, because all of these quarterbacks in this draft, we've been talking about it. It's been fun. I think arguably this is, I would not say this is better than the 2020 draft class of quarterbacks, but it is getting closer to that point. We just got to wait for Jaden Daniels or for J.J. McCarthy. But Jaden Daniels, Bo Nix, I'd say Michael Penix at this point, these guys are hitting. All you got to get is Caleb Williams, a coach, an O-line, and you got to get him some help. Because at the end of it, we may see the best of Caleb Williams. But let me go back to last night. I felt like that was a pivotal moment for Jaden Daniels because he's moved into this area where, much like we've seen some of these other quarterbacks move into, and just for a rookie, and LSU has produced very good wide receivers. They have also produced in the last couple years between Joe Burrow and Jaden Daniels. They've produced some pretty damn good quarterbacks. But that's where a lot of that credit goes to the program. But what I saw last night between Washington and Atlanta, now both these quarterbacks, rookies, Michael Penix, very accurate. I think if you give him just a little bit more time to let this puppy cook, because we know it's closer toward the end of the season and you want to get the most reps in as possible. I think between, the Kirk Cousins thing, Atlanta will figure it out. But I think at the end, both these quarterbacks looked so good. But Jaden Daniels more in particular, there were 3 teams that we were talking about that are ahead of schedule come next year. The Chargers, the Broncos, and Washington. And why this is new ownership, new GM, new coach, new quarterback. But I think more in particular, you're seeing some of the things. Washington, all it had to take was Dan Snyder getting out of the building after all that hell since 92 and then make this organization more relevant again. Hell, did you ever watch Washington in the 70s and in the 80s? I mean, hell, when they had Doug Williams, they had John Riggins, they had a lot of other really good players. Hall of Fame caliber, by the way, Art Monk. So this was a team that actually used to do some damage back then. And it used to be so fun watching, not only just with Joe Theismann, but even when you watch Doug Williams as the quarterback, there was a lot of wonders there. And at the same time, it was, of course, the pace of play was different there. You had more physicality, and it was more of like the push the grind type of offense. Now we've moved into 2024, new ownership, new GM, new coach, new quarterback, and Jaden Daniels is clearly a hit. I'm not going to put the narrative out there that just because this year you understood what environment Caleb Williams was going into. I mean, people in Chicago are already looking at this thing going, did we make a mistake drafting Caleb Williams? No, you didn't. You didn't make any mistake. The problem is you have a GM, a former offensive lineman who got cheap on O-line at $23.5 million. When you get a cheap O-line, this is what you get. And Caleb Williams having that many sacks is just, it's outrageous. But Jaden Daniels in a healthier environment, when you've got Cliff Kingsbury, the offensive coordinator, Dan Quinn, a head coach who previously was a head coach for the Falcons initially. And we saw what that team was. In fact, defensively, with Keanu Neal and Deion Jones, multiple other defensive players that I can name off the top of my head were really good in Atlanta. Good enough that they ended up appearing in the Super Bowl. So this here just tells you Washington being ahead of schedule, they are just in it for the ride. They're not in it for anything else. And I know a lot of people, when they look at Washington fans, look, they have every right to be excited. They have every right to celebrate this because can you imagine the purgatory from 1992 all the way up to, I think, 2022? Yeah, the purgatory these fans had to go through. I know a couple of people very closely. In fact, one of them who's actually here in the network we work at that I know is feeling every bit of this, and he has every right to. So that's why I think Washington, they're going to be quite the problem. Opposite from what Dallas right now, because they settled with Dak Prescott's contract. There's been hell of amount of injuries. We know that they've got some players, but in the end, Dallas, this is what they were, and they got cooked. They got the 41 burger thrown on them by Philly, and we'll get to that a little bit more later on. But I just felt like that was so fun to watch with both those young quarterbacks last night. And I know the kick, all these other stuff, the penalties, I mean, that was kind of a killer in the end. But, I mean, Atlanta, I hope that they figure a lot of this stuff out because after watching Tampa win, I think Tampa's got more in the tank to win this division. So let's also talk about over the weekend. So I want to talk more in particular about Denver and the Bengals. Joe Burrow is playing pissed off, and you could tell that from his face. Cincinnati and Denver, what a fun game that was. But I think a lot of this was Sean Payton once again has back-to-back weeks where it was what could have been. And unfortunately, the Denver Broncos have forced themselves into this position where you got to win to get in. And so initially, I know Kansas City is going to be resting a lot of their starters. You're going to have Carson Wentz starting at quarterback. But with the way that Joe Burrow has been carrying himself, it reminds me so much because you know how many do you know how many of the pressures? I think they narrowed it down. I cannot remember off the top of my head. But you know what this does remind me of? It reminds me of the time. So the defense, that's what it was. Scores that were given away. Cincinnati this year, do you know how many points they've scored close to the end of the season? Almost over 400. 415 to be exact. In fact, you know who else put something like that on there with a talented quarterback? Yeah, that was the Chargers, 459. Joe Burrow is literally going through the kind of situation just like with what Justin Herbert had to. not a great defense. They were giving up too many points. And at the same time, you're dealing with an owner that you don't even know if this stuff's going to get better. I just think with Cincinnati, what they were doing was textbook from Joe Burrow. It was very much textbook. All you had to do, because what Denver should have done, and I said this, and Chase could even attest to this. I was sitting there up and on my bed, and I was watching that game on my television. And when I see, and I've seen this multiple times, people will tell me, Jake, you're crazy for thinking this. But when you score a touchdown on a play like that from Marvin Mims, and you now have this team mentally shut down, that's what it is. They look like they've been beat with 8 seconds left in the fourth quarter, and you don't go for two. I mean, that was one of the biggest mistakes, I think, to me personally, with Sean Payton, because usually it's what separates the boys from the men. You could talk yourself into this whole Dan Campbell thing all you want. I don't care. But in that type of situation in particular, I'm going for the kill. I'm going for two. I want the playoffs more than anything else. What Denver's done great is they've got a very, 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 very good roster. And to me personally, this is the kind of stuff that there should be no excuses as why you didn't end up going for that too. None. So I think initially, it's whether it's scared of the moment or whatever, that in itself was one that should have never happened. Should have never happened for Denver. But when you allowed it to happen, you put the ball in Joe Burrow's hands, and there he goes. He just creates wonders. That's the part that I think a lot of people didn't realize. Joe Burrow is playing with his hair on fire, and if he gets into the playoffs, you do understand Kansas City wants no part of that. Even if you go into Buffalo, with Buffalo's defense in the last couple weeks, I don't think Buffalo wants any part of that. Your only due diligence if you're Kansas City is you let your other division rival in, and that's Denver. So those are some of those things to really think about. But I think Joe Burrow and what he's putting on in an MVP caliber season, carrying the team all by himself because the defense does him no justice. I know there's been questionable play calling from Zach Taylor, but none of those things. In fact, Zach Taylor even went on after the post game, and he even talked about, I ain't trading Joe Burrow for nothing. And you should. That's what a franchise quarterback is meant to look like. The touch, the throw, the accuracy, and not to mention some of those clutch situations Joe Burrow's been in. Joe Burrow's a winner. Joe Burrow's a competitor. You don't have competitive mentality around him in this offense, that's where you're mostly in trouble. And that's where quarterbacks, you'd hate for them to be this pissed off because they can't get it right in the organization. But I just felt like that game in particular, again, people could say whatever they want to. I understand if you want to play it safe. I'm not going to knock on you for that. But in that type of situation where you have mentally drained the defense, okay, defense that's given up over 400 points this year, and you mentally drained them, you should have gone for two. We've seen this over and over and over again with some teams. I don't know what the hesitation part is. Is it because some of these coaches just don't have a backbone for it? I don't know what it is. But I think in that moment, you've unleashed what you shouldn't have, and that was Joe Burrow. I don't care about the Cade York kick, but at the end, Joe Burrow knew what he needed to do. I ain't got the right kicker because McPherson's hurt. I'm going to throw this ball off to whether it's Jamar Chase or T. Higgins or somebody up over there. I mean, hell, even Yashovis. Look, it worked. And this is the kind of stuff that if you're Kansas City and you're Buffalo, I mean, hell, even if you're Baltimore, do you really want that in the playoffs? That's the kind of thing that's going to shake up the entirety of the playoffs if you let that in. But I just thought, look, Joe Burrow deserves every credit for what he's done. I just think it's so sad that a defense will do such just no justice for him. But the fact that he's doing that with like putting the team on his back, I think is the most incredible thing. And not a lot of people can admit that.
Yeah, and it like you go back to at least 2 games this year, and that's the Ravens game where they had that fumble, and they cost that field goal, and then back to the Kansas City game where they had that pass interference that cost them the game. You give them those 2 games, and the Bengals are in the playoffs immediately without a doubt. They're like I think the 7th wild card spot, and they got it locked up. And the sad part is, this is why they should go based off of numbers rather than based off of how good the team is, because the most valuable player should be the most valuable player, not the most valuable team, because Joe Burrow has 4,640 yards and 44 touchdowns. He is 6 touchdowns away from 50 and 370 yards away from 5,000 yards. He will be the second quarterback in NFL history to throw for 5,000 yards and 45 touchdowns and not win an MVP. You know who the other one was?
Mm-hmm.
Drew Brees.
Yeah.
Drew Brees, because Aaron Rodgers that year threw for 45 touchdowns and I believe 4,800 yards. And that's the only reason why. And nobody in the NFL right now, except for Lamar, has similar numbers, because Lamar for passing touchdowns has like 42, but he's nowhere near the yards in passing that Joe Burrow is.
Well, we knew that like Lamar Jackson for like the last few years. I've been saying it before and I'll say it again. When will we see Lamar Jackson actually crack over 4,000 passing yards? Because that has been the knock on him. Now, granted, this year has been the most efficient passing I think we've seen this year out of Lamar. But when you get someone like Joe Burrow, who just has such good touch and could do so many wonders with the football, that's the kind of thing that I think everybody misses out on. So I just think because of the way that, and I get it too. I understand people kind of look at this MVP thing like it's a little bit misconstrued. I get it. But because they would say the same thing like with Saquon Barkley, who's going to be right there at 2,000 rushing yards, who's already gotten up there, getting close to breaking Eric Dickerson's rushing record. But then you're stuck with the idea, because either you're going to get that number 1 seed or you're not. And then all of a sudden it's like, well, what's the point of playing Saquon? I mean, 31 carries for Philly against the Cowboys.
He needs 101 yards. That's all he needs.
And that's the thing, is that's the kind of thing that like would concern me, but I get it. I get it for, the record purposes. So,
yeah. I mean, right now Lamar has 3,955 yards. He'll easily get 4,000 yards against the Browns. He might even get 4,200 against the Browns and everything. But right now, as it stands, Joe Burrow has 4,641 passing yards and 42 touchdowns. So if he throws 3 this week against the Steelers, he'll have 45, but they're not accounting his rushing touchdowns, which he's got like 3 of. So he'll have 48 total touchdowns in all. And it's just insane that numbers like that, and you don't even have a guy like that is going to, crack the top 5 or the top 3 for MVP voting. Because right now, I think Joe Burrow's not even in it. It was Mahomes, Goff, Lamar, Saquon, and Allen the last I looked.
And a lot of it. Look, I know people like when it comes to Mahomes, there's a difference between him being the MVP as of this moment with the league, but there's a difference between what he's done in the last few years to what he's doing currently statistically. And that's what people have to understand. I just don't. I mean, this is not an MVP season for Pat Mahomes. Like we know that statistically, but we know that he's capable of doing whatever Patrick Mahomes does best, and that's the one thing we'll never criticize on, because we've seen it several times. We're stacked. We're stacked tonight, man. Listen, there is a lot of stuff that we have to point out because, as America's honesty mind, there's 2 things I got to be honest on. Unfortunately, the NIL and LeBron James now saying I could play 5 to 7 more years. What I'll save that a little bit for later, because this is why the NBA just is going to continue to die.
Mike's cutting in that out.
It's going to continue to die. I just think because of that, It's going to be interesting. But we'll get into that a little bit later on. Well, like we said, guys, 2024 is right here, close to the finish line. Come tomorrow, when all of you guys are celebrating New Year's Eve. Well, you know what you want to do? Because we know we got Monday Night Football tonight, but we got college football round 2 of the college football playoffs, and there ain't no way to end 2024 than with a bang and getting the best bets with BetUS. As you know, guys, we're moving into 2025, and so that means there's going to be a lot of stuff kicking for the new year. We want to get prepared for that. Check out BetUS for yourselves. When you sign up at BetUS, you would get your very own account manager to experience why BetUS has been the best sports book in the country for over 30 years and why that they always seem to be clutch with all of your favorite betting lines, parlay leg bets, whatever you need, and even with the casino experiences. All that and more on BetUS.com. Check it out for yourself. Let them know Jake the Snake sent you. And also, for those who have gambling problems, call 1-800-GAMBLER. Seek therapy in your respective states, wherever you may be, because we don't want you to go into the new year knowing that, oh, hell, I just bet my 401k. Now I got to get that back. Bet responsibly with BetUS and go into the new year with a bang with BetUS. BetUS, where the game begins.
Want to find your seat for the event of your choice but can't get one that fits your desire or your budget? Well, my friends, SeatGeek has you covered. SeatGeek is the official sponsor of the Snake Sports Talk Show. With a list of over hundreds of events to choose from, SeatGeek will assure you that you won't miss your seat with the amazing view of your choice at the most affordable price. Whether it's looking for your best seat in the house of your favorite sports team, finding live concerts that get you closer to your favorite artist, or enjoying your spot at your favorite live shows, comedies, and more, SeatGeek has it all just for you. Go online to SeatGeek.com or download the app on your mobile device through Google Play and the App Store. And as a special offer before checkout, use promo code SNAKESPORTS and save yourself $20 off of your purchase of your first ticket and experience why SeatGeek is the most trusted ticketing app for your next event. Remember, that's SeatGeek.com and download the app on your phone with promo code SNAKESPORTS for $20 off and find your seat with SeatGeek.
Looking for a show with the best takes and opinions? Want a show with the best coverage around the world of sports? Jam-packed with an all-star interview lineup? Then the best place to find it all, sports and entertainment, is right here. Join Jake Silva on the Snake Sports Talk Show, presented by SeatGeek and BetUS. Weeknights at 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 Pacific on Sports Wave Network.
Snake Sports Talk Show is sponsored by Muscle Tech, with hundreds of supplements and vitamins to choose from, all packed with 100% all-natural proven ingredients. You can be sure that Muscle Tech will give you the edge and the boost to train and look like your fit and healthy best, whatever your goals are. Try Muscle Tech today and use promo code SNAKESPORTS to save 30% off your purchases.
Well, I will tell you this. So something that I wanted to basically point out to everybody, because there's been a lot of surprises in the NFL, and I think we made that very, very clear. So the surprise, of course, this weekend, which was kind of nuts because of the amount of scoring that was involved, we know that there was 5 40-point games all weekend long. I couldn't even believe it. In fact, Drew Lock, I don't even know if he's honestly going to stay in New York after just that one. 5 touchdowns from him. It was insanity. But one thing that I do want to point out is, out of a lot of the surprises in the NFL, I think most people seem to have forgotten about who Jim Harbaugh is as a coach, and not to mention as a mentor. So the Los Angeles Chargers clinched their playoff spot on Saturday. after a humongous win against the New England Patriots, 40-7. They clinch it. They're back in the playoffs after a horrific 5-12 finish last year at this point in time. And so, what a good win for the Chargers. But more importantly, what a great year it's been of turnarounds for most teams. Washington, the Chargers, and for Denver, if they in fact make this in. But the Chargers are like Washington last night. They're ahead of schedule. And the part of this is this team, all they needed is some playmakers on offense. But they practically had the same group on defense from last year. And all it had to take was Jim Harbaugh to turn this culture around, bring his right-hand man, Jesse Minter from Michigan, who, by the way, spent time and hung out with Mike McDonald, okay, and learned a lot of the coaching from there in Michigan before he ended up going to Baltimore and now is the head coach in Seattle. And then, hell, even when you would see Wink Martindale. So the thing about this is Jim Harbaugh is always going to have a right-hand man next to him. We thought at first, when his time in San Francisco, we knew it was going to be Greg Roman because of the way that the offense is. He's all about ground and pound, win the trenches, win the time of possession, and then you basically pass with that play action. So what Jim Harbaugh has been able to do in the last few years, we've watched him coach, took a 1-11 Stanford program and made him a relevant program. And especially for a techie school like Stanford. Goes to San Francisco. They come off a year where they fired Mike Singletary. They bring in Jim Harbaugh, and this team was 11-3, and they made it into the NFC Championship with Alex Smith at quarterback. And we know the next year prior to that, after all that, he ended up getting Colin Kaepernick to the Super Bowl. But then once he ended up getting fired, he went back to his alma mater at Michigan, which Michigan is a big brand. And the problem with them was didn't get the coach right, didn't build their relevancy in quite some time. Jim Harbaugh, regardless how everybody feels about the whole situation, but he made it happen. They then win a bunch of games. It took time, especially against Ohio State with Urban Meyer, but especially too when you have Ryan Day. They won games against Ohio State, which that seemed to still haunt Ryan Day to this day. No pun intended. But the fact of the matter was, Jim Harbaugh got into the Natty, won it in his alma mater, and we know because of the whole entire, investigation and all the rest of it, which will eventually come to light, but he didn't want to go back to college. Why wouldn't anybody? When I talk about the NIL here in a little bit and the way college football and how all this stuff is going to become chaotic if they don't get this right and they do not end up getting this structurized properly, it's going to be a mess. But he chose to go to the NFL and chose to go to the Chargers. Initially, Chicago wanted him, but Kevin Warren got in the way. And that's why Chicago's in the position that they're in. But the Chargers finished 5-12 last year, and they're 10-6 now, and they face the Raiders for the season finale next week. And I think they probably will be 11-6, and all kudos to what Jim Harbaugh does. And you know what's funny? Jim doesn't like being the center of attention. So when they start talking about stuff like this, he doesn't give credit to himself. He gives credit to everyone in the room. Joe Ortiz, the team, the defensive core, his whole entire coaching staff. That's who he gives the credit to. But that's what's so humbling about a gentleman like Jim Harbaugh. And whether you like him or you don't, or you think he's quirky or weird, doesn't matter. Players are willing to play for him. They're willing to go to war with Jim Harbaugh no matter what week it is. But I will tell you this, Justin Herbert, this hatred, and especially with the way the analysts have been talking about Justin Herbert, needs to stop. You know what he did? In the first 5 seasons of his career, he has now passed Peyton Manning with the amount of passing yards in the first 5 seasons. You know what he's also done? He's thrown 3 interceptions And the last two quarterbacks who's thrown 3 or less with 400 passing attempts, in which I believe is an elite class, an elite group to be a part of, that was Tom Brady and Aaron Rodgers. Those are the last two quarterbacks that's ever been able to do it. Justin Herbert, when you get a winning coach, does everything that people have been questioning he wouldn't do. The only thing now that would sweeten the whole story is you go get him a playoff win, because I think he more than deserves that after Staley took that away from him. Yes, he took it away from him. You had a 27-0 lead at half against the Jags and became a complete collapse. It was an embarrassment, and that playoff potential win was taken away out of Herbert's fingers. You think it may have been Herbert's fault, but when you have a collapse of a coaching staff like Staley, that was horrifying. So now you have Jim Harbaugh in the building, different mentality, different culture. This is where the Chargers look for real. How for real are they? Good enough to win a playoff game. Not sure if they're good enough to become a Super Bowl caliber team. I don't think just yet. But when they do, they need one more off season, and I think it's off to the races from here. But you never know. And you know what's funny about this? They're practically the similar build like the Chiefs this year. It's kind of crazy to think about it, but it's situational play. It's great coaching. It's great quarterbacks. And they're the one team twice that they played actually to their strengths. It was only a 7-point game the first time and then a 2-point game in the last bout. You think the third time around, you think that's going to be easy for Kansas City? I don't know. But all I'm knowing is I think they have a better shot at least getting the 5 spot and facing Houston. It could be a coin flip between Baltimore or Pittsburgh, but I think your sights are set against the Houston Texans because they're beaten and battered. They're messed up. So I think that's the opportunity. You get the win, you get red hot, you get on fire, and let's see where the rest of the playoffs go from here. But what a year for Jim Harbaugh, back in the playoffs after all these years, and we get to see some wonders out of him once again. Chase with the news.
This is the Hot Press.
Just love seeing it, man. Jim Harbaugh back in the postseason. Boy, this playoff is going to have a lot of stories to tell. But this is going to be, and you know what's funny is I can't think of the state of the AFC, which is the insanity part. Because I'm watching Pittsburgh right now playing the way they are. Houston is basically going through a sophomore slump with C.J. Stroud. But, you know, the Chiefs, do you really think, I know they get the first round bye, but do you really think they are all that coming off the bye? I don't know yet. So, yeah. I don't know, man. There's a lot to really think about.
And the fact that the Chiefs are going to be resting a lot of their starters, and it's going to be almost 20 days before they play their first game, it's going to be interesting to see how that is. I mean, last time it didn't phase them, the last time they had the number 1 seed. So I don't think it'll phase them this time, especially with the coach and quarterback combo that they got. So it'll be interesting. But I want to start off with, you know, a lot of people are getting on the case of one of the potential top quarterbacks in this draft class, Cam Ward, for his showing of, you know, they say disrespect, they say, you know, lack of encouragement, they say they can say all that they want, but Mario Cristobal was the one that pulled Cam Ward out of the game after that record was broken and said, all right, we want you to sit, we want to go with the young guys to see what they got, go ahead and rest up, don't hurt yourself for the NFL draft. And a lot of people seem to think that Cam Ward quit on his team.
But you know what? And this is what I'll talk about in the last couple minutes of the show. But this is pertaining more to the NIL. Okay, this is what it is. When the NIL first came in, and these players, because you know what I did over Christmas and then, of course, over the weekend? I watched some documentaries. So, you know, I text you, I told you I watched the Enigma documentary. I actually watched the Johnny Manziel documentary, which, by the way, that's a must watch. That is really fun. My next one's probably going to be Swamp Kings. But the fact that down in College Station, Texas, right? Texas A&M, they knew what they were doing. And that's why, like Johnny Manziel, say what you will, he had to do whatever it took for him to get paid. Because it was like, look, you're using off all this money that I potentially could have gotten and used it for renovations for Kyle Field, right? That was what they ended up doing from there. They then used more of that money towards, other things to support the programs, all the rest of it. And they were using it for their own needs rather than Johnny Manziel's up out there creating wonders, because he's a Texas legend in Texas A&M and College Station. Okay,
yes, he is.
You go around there, that's what people are going to talk about. But if you think about it, could you imagine if the NIL was around and Johnny Manziel was there? Dude, he wouldn't even go to the NFL. He'd be the richest man in college football if that were the case. But the point is that, look, I love Cam Ward. I do. And we talked about this last week. But the point of it is, I don't want my players getting hurt, for one, because of their draft stock. I don't want to screw over the NFL like that. But two, this NIL deal is like, he makes a certain amount because he knows, look at who his competitor is, Shedeur Sanders. Okay, so you go in there, you up your draft stock, and you go, that's why I said it was more draft stock reason. But you go and up it, you may potentially be the top 5 pick. And so that was what this whole thing was about. Now, with whatever Mario Cristobal decided to do was on that. But I think a lot of this is a conflicting reason between how they deal with the NIL, how they deal with a lot of these young kids these days, and with the coaching, because that's a lot on coaches. So, and I don't think people actually get into the root of this whole thing. That's why I think if you get the right people to structurize this, build it more consistently, I think you'd be fine. But that in particular was more for draft reasons. That's why,
It just irritates me when I made a video saying that I wanted Cam Ward, and everybody's just like, I don't want a guy that quits on his team in the middle of a game and everything. And they were all saying that, he hasn't done anything spectacular in college to set him apart from,
and guess what?
Anybody else. I'm like, come on.
Guess what? When we get into when's the draft usually? Late April?
It's going to be the last week of April, the very last week of April.
Okay, so when we get to the last week of April, guess what? Nobody's going to care because Cam Ward's going to be drafted. So why would anybody make a big deal out of it? Leave it that's the kind of thing that I'm just like, look, you could go ahead and heckle now, but by the time we get into April and Cam Ward's drafted, nobody's going to care. He's in the NFL now. Get over yourself.
And these are the same Browns.
Thinking about that defense more than just anything else if I'm Miami.
It's funny because these are the same Browns fans that are going to heckle the crap out of Andrew Berry and Jimmy Haslam if he goes to the Giants and or Raiders or whoever and then balls out, and then they're going to be like, oh, well, the Browns should have drafted him. I'm like, you guys didn't want him. No Browns fan except for me wanted Cam Ward or Shedeur Sanders. So you can't blame Berry or Haslam for that because that's not what the fans wanted.
Yeah, maybe you should ask Drew Lock about that. Maybe that's why. He's already a menace in New York. So
speaking of that, so the format of everybody sitting here saying that teams should purposely tank when they've got guys who got incentives on the line, they've got guys that are playing for specific reasons and wanting to win for specific reasons. Everybody's all pissed off that the Giants have now ruined their chance at the number 1 overall pick in the draft. And I think that it's hilarious.
Look, after that game against the Colts, the Colts are eliminated now, but I don't think anybody really knows how to quote-unquote tank. Let's just say, I don't even think anybody knows exactly how to be in draft implications properly. Okay, because we watched the Raiders. They won 2 straight now, and here's the other thing. Now, the New England Patriots hold the number 1 overall pick as of right now. And I'll get a little bit more into that. I was talking about this a while back. I don't know if you were there for that, but in the past, I actually had a very good friend of mine who's very close with the Patriots, and I called this what if the Patriots got the number 1 overall pick? You can imagine the overhaul that can happen. I'll explain a little more, but the fact of the matter is, I don't know what the Giants truthfully are doing now. Again, the Giants might have other plans. If they do not plan to take a quarterback this draft, you and I talked about this. This could be a destination for someone like Kirk Cousins or Sam Darnold. It could be. And then you go and draft the next product the next year after because it'll be a little bigger. My guess is, because there's going to be a ton. There may be potentially Arch Manning. There may be Garrett Nussmeier, by the way, who's raw, but I think if you get him like pretty structured up, accurate, and you help the touch of the throw, I think Garrett Nussmeier would be great. But there's more quarterbacks in that draft the next year over. So we'll wait and see how it plays out. But yeah, I thought the Giants, that was interesting. And look, say what you will, whether that post of the Giants cleats was either you're trolling up on them or that's where you were hoping to go. I don't know. I don't know what the Sanders are doing, are thinking. But look, everybody's got tactics. So I don't know. It's interesting.
So there is a possibility for the Cleveland Browns to have 3 first-round picks in this year's draft and also next year's draft as well. And here's how it could happen. Right now, the Browns are currently sitting 3rd in the NFL draft order. If the Patriots and Titans were to lose this next week or win this next week, which is possible because both teams, Bills and Texans, are resting their starters, and then the Browns lose, we get the number 1 overall pick. Now, there is talks that they may trade down with the Raiders and get their first-round pick for next year and then the year after. There's also been a lot of talks with teams calling about Myles Garrett and his availability. Yeah. And one of the front runners right now is the Chargers try to land him. And, getting their first round pick, we could have our own, the Raiders, and your guys's for the next 2 years. If it's not this year, it'll be 2026 and 2027 with 3 first round picks for the Cleveland Browns. And, having the Chargers as the front runners for Myles Garrett, man, that's dangerous.
Now, here's the other thing, too, because there may be teams that we might speculate that could be wanting to trade up to get up and into the draft, and for whatever reason. It could be any of those whatsoever. But, yeah, I scrolled up on the internet, and I was literally kind of doing my researches, and I came across that. Not only just with Myles Garrett, but there was also talks about, potentially Tyreek Hill. I don't know how sure that is, but as far as Myles Garrett, you and I have talked about this, and I told you from the beginning, why not? Because where Myles Garrett is, and that just solidified everything. I don't think he wants to be a part of a rebuild. And you can't blame most players because players do want to be at the highest level. They want to get there to the biggest stage. So your only best option to do so is to get the draft capital while you can, while the value's high. And you know what? This kind of goes toward just like what we look at the housing market. Do you really want to miss out on the opportunity that you're going to sell a property this high? You're never going to get in that market this way because the market because this is what inflation does. When it gets expensive, right? It's a perfect time to sell. And then by the time it crashes down, it'll be the perfect time to buy. Buy low, sell high. That's the name of the game. So that's why I think if you're the Cleveland Browns, you want to sell this thing, get the most draft capital, and buy yourself the amount of capital to where you've got now more potential draft picks. Remember, you've got a multitude of options you got to fill. So that's why I'm like, I like this. And in particular, whomever that is going to be the perfect suitors to give up those picks, and then you give them Myles Garrett, because here's the thing. They may only have Myles Garrett for 3-4 years at best for an edge rusher, and then you go and then you're getting a young kid.
2 more years left on his contract, and then
he's 28.
He's a free agent, and then he'll be 30 by the time his contract's up.
So that's what I'm saying. So he's 28. You could probably end up getting realistically 4 more years out of him. And then by that point, you can move off and go and draft the next young thing. So that's the same thing I'd say for Cleveland. Cleveland would be in a very good position if they played their cards right. But like I said, I think your biggest component out of everybody else is Myles Garrett. And I understand how some Cleveland fans feel about that. But like I said, I'd rather have the opportunity, because I don't think I'm ever going to get a window like this ever again. I'd rather get the opportunity to get it now, get the capital that you should, because this is defensive heavy. And what's to say you don't get another edge rusher in the free agent market? You may go buy somebody to end up coming in, shape these guys in, and then you have the guys for the next 5-7 years. That's the name of the game in life. So,
yeah. And it's insane to think about, because not only is that I don't know if you saw all the interviews. Myles said that he wants to stay in Cleveland. He wants to be loyal to the team that drafted him, but they have to have a plan put in place in order for him to stay, and a plan that involves winning. Denzel Ward said the same thing. Otherwise, he's going to request a trade. And then Joel Bitonio said, I'm not going to come back and play for any team other than the Browns, because it would feel weird to put on a different uniform. But I'm not going to come back and play and, risk hurting my body even more if I can't be guaranteed success. And I could also see Denzel Ward being traded too. And here's the kicker. There is several teams that are looking for an elite corner of his caliber that would give up a first-round pick. Washington Commanders, Jacksonville Jaguars, Las Vegas Raiders, and just imagine the Raiders trade up and get Shador, or they end up trading their first-round pick to get Denzel Ward and everything to us. We could have a first-round pick of our own, and then somebody else's this year.
Maybe Sam Darnold down in Sin City. That might be interesting.
Yeah, and it's just crazy to think about, because I would hate to gut this team defensively, but just imagine if we could, get Denzel Ward to Jacksonville and we get their first round pick. We could pick the guy that we want, whether it be Will Johnson or whatever, and then we go and get Abdul Carter or Mason Graham or somebody starting young there.
It's like I said, that's why even if you trade Myles Garrett, there's Abdul Carter right there, because if that being the case, Cleveland and the Panthers, I could see, would be in the prime runnings of getting somebody like an Abdul Carter. They would be. And then here's the other saving grace. You've got Gregory Newsome. You got Greg Newsome there in that backfield. So you can build upon that secondary however you'd like. But, yeah, this offseason, Chase, I'm telling you, we are all in for it come March. Because this is going to be nuts. I'm telling you, free agent signings, trade rumors, and then by the time we get into that last week of April and the draft, boy, bet your ass we are going to be all over on this whole thing.
We'll have the draft order complete next week. Next week we'll see what the entire draft order is going to be, and we will see who gets the number one pick.
Our final top 10 draft pick before we end up going closer into the draft, where we'll have our full 32 slate. We'll have 3 of those mock drafts. We did that this year, so next year we're doing it again. And actually, we got a lot of very good views on it. Very, very good views.
There we go. I love it.
Chase with the news.
This is the Hot Press.
All right, so since we have at least a couple minutes up onto the show, I think the one thing we should understand, and reiterating to what Chase was talking about with the whole Cam Ward thing. So, look, college football, and tomorrow is going to be fun. Boise State, Penn State. Everybody loves a story. Okay, college football is so tribal. Okay, there's no way that you could ever change college football into what it was meant to be. Tribal, it's more unfiltered. It's also something, too, where college campuses, if you've ever been to them, okay, they invest college towns from Tuscaloosa to Athens, Georgia, to Ann Arbor in Michigan, and hell, even when you get into South Bend, when it comes to Notre Dame, okay, even with a Catholic school, these places, they get wild and rowdy, okay? Outside of the Saints, hell, you go into Death Valley with LSU, do you know how packed of the stadium it will be? The point I'm trying to make is because this stuff with college football, this is why with the NIL in place and the transfer portal, this is the stuff that is going to potentially become college football's worst enemy if you do not get this structured. Because you know what Cam Ward was doing. You know what he was going to do. He sees Shedeur Sanders up over there next door against BYU. And I mean, BYU gave it to Colorado. But Shedeur Sanders, I think he'll be in a very, very good atmosphere if teams like the Raiders draft him, because they've got enough money in the cap that they could buy an offensive line or draft one. They could get defensive players. Not to mention, I got Michael Mayer and Brock Bowers. I've got Trey Tucker and even Jacoby Myers. I have some pieces. I could go add more. But the point is I think the Raiders, you're in a better fit. But the other question mark is the coach right? Is Antonio Pierce the right answer for the Raiders? That's a question mark. But Cam Ward was solidifying more of his draft stock. And that's why he went and did what he did in that first half. And then whatever happened the rest of it, whether it was Mario Cristobal or it was Cam Ward or whatever, doesn't matter. And like I told Chase here in the previous episode, if I was Cam Ward and when it came to the bowl game, these bowl games, to be honest with you, what freaking meaning does it have if you're not in the college football playoff? That's the difference. Do you really think that I'm going to puff my chest up because I won the Pop-Tart Bowl? Hell no. I'm not. I'm going to puff my chest up when I win the Natty. Okay? I'm going to be feeling like Matthew McConaughey and Wolf of Wall Street, probably feeling like Jim Harbaugh, jolly good fellow there, when I win the Natty. But I'm not going to puff my chest out for the Pop-Tart Bowl, the damn Cheez-It. I don't care. So, but the deal is that the NIL, and here's the other part that's also going to be true. So apparently, the rumor of it is that now there's going to be an implement that's going to involve the junior colleges, the JUCO schools. Do you know how difficult, and do you also know how ridiculous that will be if that was ever implemented, and how it's not going to screw over college football, because college football in the transfer portal, you're going to have a lot of these guys coming in left and right. But that's going to screw over the high school kids, the ones you're out there recruiting. In fact, Chase is going to love this. I've spoken to at least 3 high school football athletes. Okay, one who's currently in the college football playoff at Arizona State. I got another one who's an offensive lineman in Louisville, and I have another one who I guarantee you, and Chase, I'm putting this on record. This kid may become the next Tyreek Hill once he's graduated from high school and he goes into college football, because he's got 32 college offers. And all those include Oregon, LSU, Oklahoma. He's got all that. And this is a kid from Red Oak, Texas. Okay, he's the 4-star wide receiver, small, has great hands, and boy, does he have a lot of explosion on him. But the point of it is, all these high school athletes deserve a shot at showing off their skill. Why would you implement the JUCO? I don't understand that. That's going to screw over the possibility of the high school kids more than it would be of JUCO having to go into a D1 college school. And I mean, for anything of that matter, could you imagine, like, even in an FBS school like North Dakota State? I would love to see them in a D1 situation. Put them in the Mountain West, or put them in the WAC. But the only thing is that college football, what was spoken about it, and in fact, James Franklin, Penn State's head coach, came out and talked about that if the college football, like the committee, if they were to put together a commissioner, you know who's the one person that was on the back of James Franklin's mind? Nick Saban. Why not? Nick Saban being the pillar of what college football was meant to be and has been for a very long time. And we know since his retirement, the point of it is because the NIL deals were so drastic that you cannot coach out these players. There's a certain way to do it, but it feels like you're on a tightrope. You have to kind of, tread the waters lightly with some of these kids. Nick Saban wasn't about that. And you're in college football. It's tribal. Okay, so a lot of these coaches, of course, they're going to coach their guys hard. You either are invested or you're out. Even it don't matter with your NIL money. So that was one of the hardest parts for Nick Saban. But I think if you put him in a commissioning board, which is what I talked about, is about the CEO part. You put him in a commissioning board. You know who you're going to end up putting in there? And I've talked about this with multiple great college minds. Nick Saban, Mac Brown. I think there's a case you could probably put maybe, just maybe, an Urban Meyer. Because the point is, you're going to hire the guys who are basically within the regions. I have a guy that's in the West region. I have a guy who's in the Southeast, which is mostly in Nick Saban's territory anyway. And then probably a little bit more up in the Northeast, but that would be more of like Urban Meyer's territory. And then I have somebody right there in the Midwest and the North, and maybe somebody right there down in the South in the tip of Texas. I think it works. Why not? You already have GMs being implemented in all these programs, and all you got to get is just somebody to oversee this. And then you get a commissioning board to actually make what college football is supposed to be. This year is the inaugural year of the 12-team playoff. Everybody complained about the first round. What are you complaining about? This is what you wanted as America, that you were fixated, and this is what I will say. Chase and I, when it comes to the show, we are actually the news you don't pay attention to. What do I mean by that? When you watch ESPN or you watch Fox Sports or you watch a lot of these other bigger programs, television, right? ESPN doesn't give a rip when it comes to college football. And you'll notice that when you watch First Take and you'll watch, all those other shows. They don't have a lick of what college football internally is going to go through in the next 5 years. I'm serious. So to me, like in our show, we are the kind of realistic news, unbiased, balanced. Of course, I'll hear Chase talk over his head about Ohio State and Cleveland, but you know what? Who cares? We got entertainment. But the point of the matter is that when we look at a lot of this stuff, we're critical thinkers. We're the ones who are brainstorming. We're the ones who are basically evaluating this whole thing. So why not? You put a commissioning board there with those representatives, I think it works. And then the other thing that I also did want to point out is as far as draft, because right now the New England Patriots have the number 1 overall pick at the point.
Number 1 pick.
On record, you could go and look it up on the interview that I had previously with a friend of mine, Colby Cochran, covers up in the New England Patriots. I said this on record when we came into the interview, is what if the New England Patriots got the number 1 overall pick? And you know how big of a prime spot New England would be in? Because do you really think they need that number 1 overall pick? They got Drake May. They got a quarterback. The only thing that I think was perfect is you watched that game on Saturday, right? And you saw from the draft, you know what happened in the middle of the second round? The Patriots traded with the Chargers, and that pick became Ladd McConkey.
Yep.
And Ladd McConkey torched him. And you settled for Jalen Polk. You did this same thing with N'Keal Harry when you draft him. They need a senior advisor in the front office.
They did it with Nick Chubb and Sony Michel too.
See, this is the thing. They had one. His name was Dante Scarnicchia. There was a guy that was there. That's why they were so good at the draft. but they cannot for the life of them draft skill players. You need a senior advisor in there. In fact, Albert Breer, who was very big on covering with the New England Patriots, spoke out about that and said, this is what they need to do. You get a senior advisor in there, you need to get playmakers. This is what this league is all about. And not only do they, because look, they do have a decent run game. I know how people feel about Ramondre Stevenson and whatever, but even if you go and get a running back, here's the point. This is the prime spot. Are you ready for this? When they have that number 1 overall pick, I said you could potentially draft and get an overhaul. You could trade it, get an overhaul. Because you know what I'm looking at? I'm looking at the 4 spot. And you know who's going to be there? Tetaroa McMillan. And I understand with, Travis Hunter and like all the rest of it. I totally understand that. But Travis Hunter, what is he picking? Corner or wide receiver?
Both. He said he wants to do both.
Yeah, but here's the thing. In the NFL, with the speed that you're at, we'll see. But listen, wide receiver is the market. Not so much for corner. Like the corner make money, but they're not making the top tier premium money just like with wide receiver. That's the difference. Because they're moving into this whole offensive centric league now. So my point is, you have enough money in the cap to spend. And if you trade that number 1 overall pick for somebody like maybe if Cleveland's there at 4, what's to say they don't trade up and get the number 1 overall pick, and then you end up getting like the picks from there and maybe potentially get a player. You can then get Tetaroa McMillan. You got yourself an edge rusher and you got a wide receiver. And then you can then end up going and getting offensive line, probably end up getting another weapon when you buy in free agency. Because trust me, they are going to be pretty busy. But you got to have the right people in the front offices for this. Because Drake May, say what you will, that kid's going to be something the next few years. This was clearly a rebuilding year in New England, no question. But this, I'm talking about, look, the Brady and the Belichick days are over. Okay, that 20-year dynasty, throw that thing out the window. That's not the standard. The new standard is we got Drake May. Now let's get him some talent. We ain't lacking on defense. They ain't never lacked on defense for the last few years. But lots of people have in fact voiced out about Gerard Mayo, and it's nuts. It's nuts. They're losing their minds over it. In fact,
they act like they haven't won anything in like 20 years.
But see, that's the thing. They act like they haven't. And it's just like, look, you're going every team. Could you imagine? I mean, the Detroit Lions, we're watching the success that they have right now. Did you see what they were 40 years ago? No. Mm-hmm. So the point is like everything's going to be okay. Take a breather, okay? But I'm telling you, I think that look, if that ends and New England gets the number 1 overall pick, don't say I didn't call it. I had my one interview guest that was on here, and we spoke about that, and it's on record. It's on file. That is one that I'm like, if I'm New England, sign me up, get me some more draft capital. I'm going to spend like it ain't nothing. So, yeah, that's an interesting thing. Oh, man. College football tomorrow is going to be a lot of fun, but here's the funny thing. I know a lot of people think about this with Penn State, which I do like Drew Aller. I love Tyler Warren, and I also do love Abdul Carter. But we know Boise State, they have gone toe-to-toe with Oregon multiple times. They went up against Oregon in week 2 as a member of the Big Ten.
And almost beat them.
It's not like that they haven't gone toe-to-toe with a talented conference team like that. So I guess my point, what I'm trying to say is expect anything. If you're watching this college football game tomorrow, because I know I will, and I'll probably be in my Boise orange and my blue, but here's the thing. That game's going to be fun. And for people to think that Boise State's not built for that, just watch. I'm not saying they're going to put up the numbers, but it will be a classic. And by the way, I don't know if it's me, but I have a little bit of this shaky feeling. You know what happened the last time, Chase, when Boise State was in a Fiesta Bowl? You know what happened when they made the miraculous play against Oklahoma that won the Fiesta Bowl?
No.
Why do I feel like I'm going to see that again in this game? So basically, it's a classic. It was called the Statue of Liberty. It was what it was. It was a whole entire trickery play from Sobransky, the quarterback, and the ball was going all the way around. And then they do like an entire bootleg straight up, and then that was the winner for Boise State in the Fiesta Bowl. That was a classic. That was actually one of my – I remember tuning into that television, I think, when I was a kid, and I saw that play right before my very eyes, and I'm like, oh, my God, Oklahoma's going to get upsetted right now. And everybody lost their mind because the money line was on Oklahoma. And Boise State came in and did that business. So that's the insanity part. I feel like we might get a little bit of something. We might get an instant classic tomorrow.
I mean, let's hope. I ended up picking Boise State to go all the way, so let's hope that they don't disappoint.
Yeah, I hope not either. If they make it at least a good enough game than what happened in the first rounds, because I know how everybody felt about SMU. Look, man, I saw every single comment. Everybody was talking about, oh, BYU, they melted to Colorado. I'm like, yeah, well, you shot yourselves in the foot. Whose fault's that? It's not Arizona State's. It certainly isn't SMU's and Clemson, even though I have my own reasoning for that. But yeah, interesting. This kickoff of the new year is going to be a lot of fun. We're closing up the books on 2024 tomorrow, and however that game goes by, I'll feel great about it. I'll feel great about it knowing we're going into 2025, and we're going in probably the biggest fashion. So, all right, good stuff. Well, that's going to do it for Chase and I here tonight on the show. College football round 2 tomorrow. Boise State, Penn State. Tune on your televisions on the Fiesta Bowl. It's a neutral site, so anything can happen. So it ain't like you're going to be up there in Penn State, because that would have been a completely different atmosphere. But we're going to be all on it, all the next day on the new year of 2025 in January with Chase and myself. We appreciate you guys all for being here with us as we are closer to closing the chapter of 2024 and going into 2025. A New Year's Eve edition of the Snake Sports Talk Show tomorrow. I can't wait for it. Take care of yourselves. Have a great rest of your evening, and we'll see you guys tomorrow on the last show of 2024 before opening 25.
And then we'll see you next year after that. So
exactly. Appreciate all of you guys. We'll see you soon.